Hi and welcome to Home. My name is Bren O'Callaghan. I'm the curator here. You are so welcome to join us for this new exhibition. I say exhibition, but it's actually three solo presentations, all linked by a unifying use of illustration and graphics as core to their practice. We have work by MSR FCJ, also known as Mike and Faye, by Joy Yamusangie, and by Nick Burton. So let me start and share the work of Mike and Faye. I wanted to begin with this small, innocuous-looking piece here, which you might otherwise just walk past. But for me, this is a great starting point to talk about Mike and Faye's practice. Now, Mike and Faye are a duo. They're an artist couple, and they work collaboratively together. A lot like the game of consequences, if you were to kind of draw a head and fold it over and pass it on to someone else to draw the torso. This is their style of working. Sometimes they tell me they work on the same panel together, the same piece of paper, the same canvas, simultaneously. I think of them like an octopus with his arms kind of waving, clutching pens and brushes. And sometimes they work on pieces separately and distinctly and then pass them over to the other person. What that means, though, is, of course, that they never know what's going to transpire, what the end result will be. One might have one thing in mind, but as soon as they pass that to the other sabotages it deliberately and passes it back. Now, Mike and Faye come from an artist bookmaking background or fanzine making background. I've recently had to explain what fanzines are for those who have not encountered them in this world of home desktop publishing, where everything can look really, really professional. But fanzines were a kind of amateur, largely paper-based publication that people would make. So if you were really into a band or a style of filmmaking or a particular hobby and you wanted to communicate with others and meet others like yourself, you would make kind of paper fanzines and distribute them. And Mike and Faye like to work with what they have. And their style is very cartoonish. They like to kind of encourage mistakes, mark making in their practice, lots of overlays. There's a quality much like a frequently kind of Xeroxed photocopied zine with overlay upon overlay. So this is where they began this by making kind of fanzines of drawings and pictures and images and strange tales. I mentioned the title of the show, Bubbling Pitch. And it stems from a residency that Mike and Faye undertook at an old stately home in Scotland called Hospital Field House. And so they went with the intention of making an artist publication, a new set of drawings and some paintings, but they went along with blank notebooks. They wanted to be inspired by the landscape and the space around them. So I'll draw your attention now to a new suite of drawings that they created while on residency. The first thing that we do, the first thing that we see is just how many there are. They look chaotic, they look really bright, they look a lot like cartoons, and it's very normal that we are drawn to that which we recognize, such as figures or objects or furniture or shapes, things that we can immediately discern. And as we spend more time with them, we can start to try to kind of interrogate what else might be happening. But it looks a lot like a cartoon. There are cartoons elsewhere in this triple solo, but this isn't a cartoon that we can read from left to right. That's a very normal wish to do that, to read it from left to right, because there is no narrative, there is no story in the sense that we know it taking place here. Instead, they were really inspired by wandering around this kind of old, fusty, dusty castle, and something that really struck them were the passageways that were built for servants to be unseen from walking in the main corridors or rooms, for them to kind of nip to the side and to carry plates and dishes. And so one thing as you spend more time with the drawings is you'll notice these kind of passageways, these archways, these doors, these portals. But when I think of portals and I see the cartoons, it also reminds me of like 80s style video games during which figures such as Pac-Man could enter one portal and emerge in another. And it reminds us that there are many different worlds, many different areas to explore, but we can't see them all at once. And so it adds to the mystery of this stately home they were exploring. So to look at the drawings, I've mentioned there are figurative representations of the human body, so we gravitate towards that because we think we know what it is. But then to look at, say, the large-scale paintings, these feel very different, much more abstracted. I can still tell that it's Mike and Faye making this work, but I was wondering, how might I explain these pieces to, say, a school group attending? What kind of foothold might I be able to give them? Because, for example, it doesn't include figures. But then they corrected me. They said they do. Every single one of these large format paintings includes figures. We just need to give a little bit of time to the work. It's very natural to walk past more abstracted paintings in the gallery because we think that we don't really know what they're about. We can't get much from them. But this is a great example of how if you just give it a little bit more of your time and have some confidence in your own ability to interpret a work, that you'll be rewarded. Now, this piece is called The Soot Room. It's definitely one of the most abstracted pieces in the exhibition as a whole. But if you look at it and you remember what Mike and Faye told me, that every one of these works has a figure inside, you can start to make out this kind of crouching figure, crossed feet, boots, clothing, what looks like a brightly coloured object behind here as well. So it's for us to kind of peer through and to pick out what we might see there. So there's lots of magic and mystery, and Mike was telling me that he's a real fan of horror films, and that when you watch a lot of horror films, you think you know what's happening, and that every now and then you can be kind of taken by surprise. And he says that if we spend some time with these paintings, we'll be taken by surprise, and he calls it the wait, what moment, such as when you're kind of like laying back on the couch and you notice someone creeping behind the lead character in the horror film, and you think, wait, what? And you didn't expect it, and we can get that feeling, that quality from spending a little bit more time with the paintings than we might otherwise do. So I'm moving now into our next space, our next solo presentation of work by an artist called Joy Yamusangie. Is an artist who was born, raised and lives in London. It's a very different type of exhibition in that it's much bolder in its choice of colour palette. It's called Blue Glass Fortunes, and it takes its title from this work behind me. Joy tells me that this draws directly from a dream that they had. And they awoke from the dream and they immediately started to make notes as to what they recalled. In this dream, they saw family and friends dancing and holding each other in a ballroom that was lit by brightly illuminated blue glasses or glass goblets. And so throughout this particular exhibition, the motif of the blue goblet will repeat. So it's a little bit like following breadcrumbs through the forest. It's not in every work, but you'll notice it when it's there. Sometimes it's a white goblet. And I think this is some indication to suggest that maybe it's another dream, but maybe it's a memory. Joy works very directly with memories, dreams, desires, acutely personal, and how they sort of encroach upon the real world, but how dreams, memories and hopes can also feel more than real. The next work I'm going to address is right next to Blue Glass Fortunes. Now, no blue glasses in this one, perhaps kind of a different area of investigation for Joy. This one is called Phantasm, the American in the Middle. Now, Joy made this work when visiting extended family for the first time in the city of Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. They'd never been before, and it's one of those mega cities with millions of residents, and they were standing by the road, and it was like an overwhelming experience, and lots of mopeds and bikes driving past. And they tell me of this moment when a moped drove past, and a figure on the back of the moped looked around and made direct eye contact with Joy, almost like it was slow motion. And in that moment, the figure is here, turning around, making direct eye contact with us, a figure on the back of a bike, a moped, wearing a red hat. But in that moment, Joy said they saw themselves. They saw what could be described as their doppelganger, their exact double, their mirror image. They saw someone who looked like them, but who was not them. And then in a moment, that was past and they drove on. So here was Joy, a visiting family in Kinshasa, seeing people who looked like themselves, but not feeling that they truly belonged. All the time they were being referred to while visiting as the American. That became a nickname for Joy while visiting, the American, perhaps because of their accented English, London. And so we have this reference to the American, and the American flag is in an inverse there. And so for me and for Joy, this work perhaps represents this sense of belonging, but also unbelonging, of recognizing yourself, your origin, your kinship with others, but also being set apart as well. Now, this is one of the largest pieces in the exhibition. It's called Underneath the Black Sky. It takes a moment to kind of adjust and to spot what it is that we're looking at here, but it's actually a top-down view of a tube carriage in London. Now, Joy draws and paints themselves into a lot of their work. So They often appear as characters within the work, and this is Joy. This is Joy sitting in the tube carriage with two empty seats either side. The colours are very bold, very vibrant, red, black, very strong, very striking. Red and black, of course, kind of colours typically associated with anger or with rage or with frustration. But I don't get that sense from Joy sitting in this seat. There's a sense of resignation, perhaps a sense of sadness. And that's because no one is sitting next to Joy. The whole tube carriage is full, everyone's engaged, looking at their phones, their papers, their books, listening to the music on headphones, but everyone has chosen somehow to sit anywhere except next to Joy. And this relates to the experience as a black British person, these sort of microaggressions that occur every day that many of us are not aware of and that we may even contribute to ourselves. People choosing to not sit in those seats next to Joy, to not see Joy. And yet, at the same time, if you look closely at the iPads and the laptops and the papers in people's hands, they're all ingesting black cultural content. So someone's reading about Windrush, someone's watching a movie with a black character in, someone's reading about race, someone's reading about up-and-coming areas, typically rough areas that black communities might live within initially before being pushed out by gentrification. And so people are ingesting and consuming black culture, but they're also denying black existence at the same time. Even this character here, one of the only character, in fact, not holding a computer screen, has African hair beads in the hair. So ubiquitous is the assimilation of black culture within the West. This whole exhibition isn't overtly political. It touches on these areas. It's a very personal exhibition to Joy, relating to their memories, their hopes, and their dreams for the future. But this piece, I feel, is particularly political, but that's my reading of it, and we're all free to make our own interpretation of any work at all in the show. Because when I look at this work and I look at the title, English Breakfast, my first response is of surprise, because I don't see anything on that plate that I recognise as an English breakfast. I don't see sausages, I don't see bacon, I don't see beans. But there's nothing less English about this English breakfast. This figure is Joy in the painting. Joy often draws themselves. You look for a telltale mark beneath the chin. They're at their family home, they tell me. Their mother has created this for them, this meal, this breakfast. It's an assemblage of different forms of food, different cuisine that they eat as a family. African foods, but also Western foods. We've got over here a semolina cake. I've never had one. I've since looked it up. I really want to try it. We've got a very kind of bold, recognisable branding of the Coke can. Joy simply tells me that that's because it's always available at family gatherings. But we've also got the paper on the table, and it's open. And the headlines of that paper are Brexit, 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 immigration, and an image, presumably accusatory, of a figure who looks a lot like Joy themselves. So here they are eating their version of an English breakfast, no less English than you or I, but being told that someone who looks like them isn't welcome in the country, doesn't belong in the country, isn't truly British, much like our interpretation of that breakfast on the plate. So the third of the three solo exhibitions now. This is really where it all began. This is an exhibition by an artist called Nick Burton, and the exhibition is called Our Plague Year. Now, Nick submitted a work early this year to our group open exhibition, the Manchester Open. It was a really enigmatic, very humorous, very wry, but very touching cartoon. It was called Lily, and it was a story of a lost bicycle told from the perspective of the bicycle. Now, if you've been to school in the northwest of England, you might be familiar with the story of a small village in Derbyshire called Eyam. And the story goes that in the 17th century, around 1665, 66, there was an outbreak of the plague, and the villagers chose, voluntarily we're told, to isolate themselves in order to protect the surrounding residents and surrounding villages and towns, to stop it from running rampant throughout the country. And of course that was a form of self-sacrifice that would inevitably result in death. So they sacrificed themselves in order to save everyone else. Nick took this story and then he spun a fictional narrative, a make-believe narrative, and applied it on top of what is happening around us right now across the world, but particularly here in the UK. And so he introduces us to these residents in a village in 1665 in Derbyshire, the village of Eyam. You now know how to pronounce it correctly. We have families such as the Berrycloths, the Smithfields, the Barbers, the Websters, old Fanny Dankworth or George Gribble. And there will be many more characters, but these are the characters who set us off, set the story playing. And they all represent different qualities that you might recognise in others and in yourself. So although they all have independent personalities, some are nice, some are nasty, some are really unpleasant, they also more broadly represent particular qualities. So we have here Lord Humphrey Berrycloth, the richest man in the village, a terrible father, a terrible neighbour. He represents control. He's furious that he's kind of locked in place, that he can't leave. He would much rather be out travelling. He does not want to spend any time with his family whatsoever. We have the anti-hero of the story so far, Godalina, his daughter. She's only 13, but she represents impatience. She hates everyone and everything, except perhaps her best friend, Edith. Edith represents hope. She has a much more positive outlook as to how this might all play out, whereas others represent paranoia or calm or gullibility, all qualities we might recognise in ourselves and others. This set, as it stands, almost reminds me of a tarot reading, that any one day we might choose 6 of these to represent how we're feeling that day, but by tomorrow we might choose another 6. So that's broadly what they represent within the story. And over the course of lockdown from late March, Nick created a set of 12 comic strips, 1 per week. And if you signed up to the mailing list, you received this in your inbox. And it starts with a tale of the lockdown being implemented in the village of Eyam, perhaps not quite as voluntarily as we're led to believe, but it relates to the current news cycle around us. So in one of the strips, we have 2 characters. One's come back from the village shop, but the village shop has sold out of vinegar. He's absolutely furious, but word has got out that vinegar can perhaps cleanse a person of the plague, and so the shelves have been stripped. And who doesn't recognise that moment that the shelves were stripped of toilet rolls? Elsewhere in other sets of stories, we've got villagers spreading gossip, unfounded gossip and rumour, which then kind of accumulates and becomes, common knowledge, even though it's based on not very much. Again, all responding to items in the news that we will recognise, but held at arm's length. Over here, we've got new content. So if you did subscribe to the mailing list, you will have seen many of these before, but you won't have seen new content. Again, responding to historical figures, historical stories, historical fact, but make-believe and told in Nick's own unique style. So here we have a new strip, the Reverend Montpesson. He was an actual church leader in Eyam during the period of the plague outbreak and took it upon himself to be something of an authority figure and to set some boundaries, quite literal in some sense, but also rules, regulations and guidelines. But here we have the Reverend attempting to explain to the villagers what those guidelines and those rules are, but the villagers are reinterpreting them and challenging them, daring to challenge authority. And so we have this kind of back and forth interpretation, much like we do right now with central government over the triple tier, quadruple tier system. So we have this direct correlation to our own current lived experience. We also have, you might recognise this riff here on the Catch It, Kill It, Bin It poster campaign. Although for Nick, he's suggesting that we clean it, vinegar washes away the plague, smoke it, pipes combat miasma, there's these invisible vapours that were said to rise from the earth carrying infection, or smell it, nosegays purify airways. These were handkerchiefs filled with dried flowers to literally mask the scent of death. So there we have it, 3 new solo presentations for you to enjoy, either in person or online. I mentioned that during lockdown, Nick created 12 episodes of our plague year, all accessible online now. But the great news is that he's since been successful with an application for further funding to the Arts Council of England. And so he's now actually creating 40 more episodes. Now they're going to restart in just a few weeks' time, and they'll all be available and distributed online by home. So don't hesitate to sign up to the Our Plague Year mailing list. You will only receive these episodes. We don't send you anything else. And that will continue throughout this year and into next year as well. We've also got photo galleries Online, you can see all the exhibitions, you can explore each and every individual work should you for any reason not be able to visit the gallery. We also have digital guides and interviews with the artists, and we'll be creating more content. Do tell us if there's anything particular that you would like us to create. We'd like to learn from this experience, so tell us what you need. We'll do our best to provide that for you. And please sign up to our art mailing list as well, and you'll hear all about new projects and new exhibitions coming as and when we're allowed to bring them to you.